Well, it's officially 2022, and this is one of my favorite times for music. It's the first couple of weeks in the new year, so there's not a whole lot of big releases that are in the immediate now. There's a few albums that are definitely a couple weeks away, but in the meantime, it gives me a chance to look back throughout the year and catch up on any albums that I didn't get a chance to listen to throughout the album cycle. Either I didn't know that they were coming out and people are talking about them, they're making a lot of headway on like the top 10, 20 lists of that past year. And so I love just diving in and finding out those really special diamonds in the rough, the ones that have already essentially been curated for me through other reviewers and websites and whatnot. So these are a few of the albums that I slept on in 2022. They're not in any kind of list, and unlike my usual quarter notes where I have 4 of them, I've actually got 5, and probably going to have to do a couple other videos in this same vein anyway. So let's just dive into this. Ascension codes from Cynic. So the first one that I wanted to talk about really right off the get-go was Cynic. And so for a lot of those of you that don't know about Cynic, Cynic was one of the big progressive metal bands in the genre. They broke out of the mold back in 1993 with Focus, and that is still one of the standard progressive metal albums, kind of like the little darling, same with their follow-up album almost 20 years later, Traced in Air in 2008. Both of these albums provide a 1-2 punch. I love both of these albums. I think they're great. Kindly Bent to Free Us, the album they released in 2014, was fine. It was fine. And I knew that Cynic was coming out with a new album last year because, it came out, it was making a lot of headway. There was talk about the bass player no longer being with them, so kind of filling in the gaps with keyboards. Like Dave McKay provides all the bass synthesizers, essentially pulling a Doors where all of the bass notes are being provided by a keyboard or a synthesizer. And what I really appreciate is all of the sounds that are created with this. This album has such a massive bottom on it. It provides a harmony, it provides a rhythm all at once, and I really love that foundation. The thing that really got me with this album, even though it's, almost 20 tracks across almost 50 minutes, is that it doesn't feel the runtime. It's almost 50 minutes, but it feels like it's a 20-minute suite. And a lot of this is due to some of the interlude tracks being less than 30 seconds. A lot of these are 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 27 seconds. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a hodgepodge, but I feel like if you just kind of turn your brain off in terms of where you are in the track lengths and just think about where you are in the album, it helps me really digest this album. And man, that last track of Diamond Light Body, I find myself being floated away. It's reminding me of some of the better parts from Colors 2 and the big Goliath that was Gargantuan from Hushed and Grim. This album completely took my breath away, and even for somebody like myself who enjoys Cynic's music, I can't really consider myself a diehard fan. This album might have converted me. This album was a real treat. It was one that I found myself coming back to, and I could not stop listening to it. And this is one that easily, I love with my whole heart. So that's what I've got for Cynic. Go and check this one out. This one is one that you do not want to make the mistake that I made and sleep on this. And so if you're into any kind of metal music, you got to check this one out. Absolutely. Magnified As Giants from Caligonaut. So Caligonaut is a new band, actually, out of the woodworks from Ole Michael Bjorndal. I think that's how you got this one. He's a renowned member of the prog projects such as Oak, Airbag, and Bjornis. So I'm a huge fan of Airbag. So when I found out that Ole was going out on his own and kind of producing his own work after being an integral member of all these other bands, I got really excited. And I didn't, I've heard this album being spoken of in the wisps of, the prog sphere, and I never really sat down and got into it. So I figured, okay, this is the time to do so. And I was really, really blown away. Considering that he's more of like the vocals and guitar works, I was really surprised at how much of like a symphonic, almost neo-prog, this album sounds like. Magnified As Giants is your classic retro symphonic prog, which blows me away that it's really only the one guy. I mean, he does have a number of individuals on here helping him out. I'm loving the two opening tracks on this, Emperor and Hushed. Great prog in that sense. They've got some great build-up, some great payoffs. I'm loving the synthesizers that are provided by Lars Fredrik Frølies. His keyboard work is just dripping with beauty. And this is something that I really, really love about a lot of these bands and this style of music. I know that this is being labeled as crossover prog, but for me, this is almost blurring the lines between what's symphonic retro prog and what's neo-prog, because this is holding a lot of the flavors that I love with neo-prog. The only thing that it doesn't get for neo-prog is that the vocals aren't as operatic, it's not as theatrical, it's not as melodramatic as the usual neo-prog goes, but it does check off a number of really great boxes. The thing that I particularly love, as I've already mentioned, are the great build-ups. Like, these first two opening tracks are 10 minutes long, and it really allows the tracks to grow, to stretch their legs, to explore and implement the space. It allows this symphonic sounds to really overlay and develop themselves. And Lighter Than the Air, the almost 20-minute track on here, the big closing piece on here, it does some really good jobs, but I do feel as though the beginning and the end are a little bit too drawn out. I do feel as though it does take its time a little bit too much to build itself up until we get right into the track proper. And I do feel as though the play out at the end doesn't really service the song all that much. It does feel as though it's a peter out, but everything found between those, 3 minutes here and there is just spectacular. Again, I'm loving those build-ups, I'm loving those payoffs, the interplay between the guitars provided by Ole Michaels and Lars Fredrik are just stellar. Like, there are a few moments, especially on Lighter Than Air, where the keyboards come on, and I'm reminded of some of the great playouts that we had with IQ, or even going further from like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and even Genesis. Like, they're really channeling that essence, but like the feeling that I'm getting is some of those highlights from like IQ and Arena. Loving this album. This one is another one that I absolutely love with my whole heart. If you're a fan of symphonic prog, if you're a fan of the retro and neo prog, you're going to dig this album. You're really, really going to like it. This is another one that I'm kicking myself that I slept on within 2021, because it deserves all the praise that it's been getting. So absolutely go and check it out. Giant Skies debut self-titled album. So this album has been making a lot of headway within the prog spheres lately. It's currently sitting at the #1 prog album of 2021. And Giant Skies was a side project from the band of Soup. And I actually fell in love with Soup back in 2017 or so. I didn't realize that they actually put out an album this past year of Visions. I'm going to have to check that out. Remedies from 2017 was an absolute treat. Just great modern progressive rock. So anyway, Giant Skies, side project, Norwegian, modern prog. This one I feel, unlike Soup, which was much more in the vein of like Anathema or Atema, or however you want to pronounce it, or even like Airbag or Anubis, or any of those like more modern progressive rock bands. I feel like this one is much more into more of the modern stream. The main thing that I took away from this album is like, this is what those indie darling bands like Arcade Fire or the Decemberists or any of those styles, specifically Arcade Fire, this is what they would sound like if they went full on prog. They still kind of captured the essence of that indie, very independent art rock of the mid 2000s, but really polished it up and created something very, very special. And saying that in like the vein of progressive rock. And I feel like in some ways this really works, and I can understand why so many people are loving this album. But for me, I do feel as though there's a lot of wandering, there's a lot of like surveying and excavation of the material, but not a whole lot of payoff. There's not a whole lot of like gems found within the excavation sites. I think the main reason for this is that there's so much concentration on the creation of soundscapes and the creation of atmospheres, the creation of emotion, without balancing that with some really good passages of music, some really good like foundational bangers, some really good hooks. I mean, I still really, really enjoyed my time within this album, but I didn't find myself really craving to go back to it. But still, it was a good time, and it's one that I would highly recommend checking out if you're into this more of a, I guess, modernization of progressive rock music without looking right to the past, you know, because I do feel as though a lot of prog music is just retro prog that looks to the 70s, and these guys look more into the 2010s, and I applaud them for doing that. This is one that I would probably download if I'm being perfectly honest, and I recommend it, as I mentioned, for anybody that's looking for this more modernization of progressive rock. Blood Moon 1 by Converge and Chelsea Wolfe. So, I've never really sat down and listened to either Converge or Chelsea Wolfe, but this was gaining a lot of headway on a number of top 10s from a lot of my contemporary music reviewers. You know, I need to thank both Rocked and Crash Thompson for making me aware of this, because, man, this is right up my alley. This is the experimental tech death metal rock that I love, you know, like it's pushing the boundaries. It's very extreme at times, but it's always surrounded about capturing beauty, you know, like beauty can be found within the sublime, and that is definitely found within this album. I love when they go off and just really push the boundaries for how this extreme type of metal can play out. I'm loving the growls and the screams from both Converge and Chelsea Wolfe. I think that the two of them work very, very well together in producing this style of music. My favorite track by far is Coil. Just the tightening of the coils on this track to finally become released and finding the beauty within. That's what I love about this style of music. I love the dark, big brush darkness that we have on so many of these tracks with hints of light here and there. And it's those capturing of the light that makes my like blood boil so brightly. This is the style of this experimental tech prog that I love. And because it's Blood Moon 1, I can only hope and pray that there's Blood Moon 2. I really should actually look into it to see if there's something in the works, because I absolutely fell for this album. The only thing that I will say is that like the first 4 or 5 tracks, Blood Moon, Viscera of Men, Coil, Flower Moon, and Tongues Played with Dead, are the best tracks off of this album. The album does kind of waver within the second half. I don't feel quite as connected. I do feel as though my attention is starting to waver a little bit once we get to the second half of this album, but man, that first half really grabs you and doesn't let go. So this is one that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. This is one that I obviously will be returning to throughout 2022. And again, much like the albums that I've already talked about, I'm kicking myself that I didn't listen to this one sooner. But hey, what are you going to do? You can't make up for lost time outside of just getting her done now. Promises by Floating Points and Pharoah Sanders. So the last one I'm going to be covering, number 5, we can call this the bonus track from A Quarter Notes. Again, this was another one that came out of a lot of top 10s that I found. You know, I got to thank Anthony Fantano for recommending this one to me. Man, this one, again, just pushes the boundaries for what music can be. It's really playing with these variations of the theme to the point of like really like kind of reconstructing music to the point of what can music do. And I'm loving all the different movements on here. I'm loving that there's so many different payoffs to it. I love the swelling, soaring of sounds that are produced after, you know, trying and experimenting all these different things. I think Pharoah Sanders on the saxophone just really showcases his brilliance and the master of the craft after so long knowing it. He's able to blend this almost jazzy approach to a very constrictive classical landscape that really allows and showcases the strengths of both. It shows the impressionistic and improvisation aspect of jazz with the very rigid and very constrictive style of this neoclassical approach. I'm loving that both just tighten and loose at the same time. It's very much a mosaic of sounds. You know, it's the perfect example of an impressionistic painting, and you really do get as much into the art as you do put into it. So yeah, this is another one that I love with my whole heart. Now, I do need to put the caveat that this album wouldn't be necessarily for everybody. This is more of a art piece, and it really does push the boundaries for today's contemporary music of what music can do. Like, this would fit perfectly within the 60s, 70s experimental side of things, especially within the jazz movements, but it does kind of put strain on the contemporary idea of what music should be. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I highly recommend it. At no point does it ever really blow down the doors. At no point does it really kind of congeal together into a viscous fluid. It's much more of the vapors that are floating around the room. So I hope I did a good job of, trying to talk about these albums, and I hope these help for you. So those are my 5 albums, breaking the mold a little bit in this one, of albums that I slept on in 2021. I'll probably have another edition because I'm sure there will be more albums like Soup's new album that I'm going to be checking out right after this. But yeah, let me know what you thought of these albums. Did you love these albums? Did you hate these albums? And also let me know of any other albums that you have slept on this year, or any other album that I may have slept on. Please let me know all about those by commenting down below. And I think that's about it. Yeah, I think that's about it. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.